You are listening to the Gritty Podcast, where we talk about all things gritty. All right, folks, welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I'm Brian Call. I'm joined by Brad Hunt, and today we're going to talk to you a little bit about a Stone-Aged Indian tribe known as the Sheepeaters. Tukudeka. They're a band of Shoshone, or they're Shoshone speaking.
Yeah.
There's some real interesting things about these people that I found fascinating as I dove into, researching them. What led me here was a sheep hunting film that I'm editing, archery sheep hunting film with our friend Jeremiah Plyer over at Wild Arrow. He shot a sheep with his bow on a once-in-a-lifetime draw tag in the state of Utah. It was pretty incredible. Yep. Desert sheep. Sent me on this journey to study about sheep, and it opened the doors. I started to learn about a lot of ancient civilizations who came. I learned about the population of sheep, much in the numbers of like buffalo in a way.
Yeah, lots of sheep.
Before European conquest. Mm-hmm. And the people that kind of ate these sheep and lived in these mountains. And the reason, these people were, they're almost like a people that never changed.
Yeah.
They retained Stone Age
skills
and traditions and lifestyles.
And I would say, from my perspective of like a little bit of research on other Indians, like I think they're the most badass Indians there are,
Well, they certainly were. You can imagine this is how Indian folks were prior to the horse, for sure.
Yep.
And they are almost the way they built things comes from a time when they had to be craftsmen and artisans.
And what really is interesting to me about them is they're not this big group of Indians together, like your Plains Indians. You got hundreds of Indians that are moving across the plains together, following the buffalo. These are small groups of like 7-10 people, and then you go down.
That's why
10 miles. There's another group of.
So, like in this book, I'm going to reference today. They talk about it more as if these are Shoshone-speaking people.
Yep.
So that's their language, but not necessarily Shoshone exactly,
right?
And not necessarily a whole distinct tribe either. They're just mountain people.
Yeah.
In little pockets.
They're like
almost like people who are just hermits that want to live far away from everyone else and have because they live so remote and in these places, there's not very many, and they don't integrate with other Indians because nobody else wants to go and live where they live.
Right.
It's almost like an Arctic group of people.
Exactly.
Because they live in the top of the Frank Church Wilderness, Yellowstone, along the Middle Fork River, salmon,
and some super, where sheep live, and some nasty
40
terrain.
below weather, like cold,
high winds,
and they're thriving.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. To live in those conditions and to be comfortable,
you gotta know what you're doing.
You gotta know what you're doing. And it turns out their structures, the homes they lived in, the way they got their food, the way they hunted, they were highly skilled. You'd have to be. There's
multiple aspects of, like, as I've started doing some research and diving into this, as we've talked about this more and more because it's integrated into the film, is how, like, I don't know what the right word is, how, oh, dang it. Their tactics were just so much different than any of the other Indians out there.
Yeah. They make a bow out of a sheep's ram's horns.
Right.
A ram's horns, a matching set of horns. And they make the best bow, basically, the most high-tech bow in America.
Especially at that time.
This is before the firearm. This is the most advanced weapon in America, is the bow.
Right.
And it seemed that the mountain dwellers had a way of making it that no one else was able to do. All right, folks, if you like the show and you want to support us and you are in need of a taxidermist, check out our friend Jeremy over at Judkins Custom Taxidermy. He does incredible work. He's got the cleanest taxidermy shop I've ever seen. And when you use the code GRITTY, Jeremy is going to expedite your project by 2 to 3 months. And he already has an excellent turnaround time. So check it out. Go to Judkins Custom Taxidermy. Let him know Brian Call at Gritty sent you. Get your mount expedited. Now let's get back to the show. and they would make the best bows, which would fetch a 5 to 10 horse
trade
value.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You get 10 horses out of a well-made single. Think about that.
Yeah.
10 horses when horses are like cha-ching,
right?
$5,000 a pop.
Well, and on the other side of it too, they were incredible tanners, and so that was something that people thought of value towards them because they wanted that tanned hide because nobody else was doing that.
It's as if they sort of never got the horse. For one, they never adopted the horse.
Yep.
They never needed the horse.
Yeah.
And because they were so secluded, they never got more advanced ways of doing things, or easier, I should say, easier way of doing things. So they were able to retain old skills that you could imagine were 1,000 years old.
Yeah, right.
Things that were lost because of modern things that came about. You no longer needed a horn bow necessarily when you got a horse, and you could maybe just ride up and throw a spear,
right?
Or just lance it. All of a sudden the need to have a really good horn bow isn't as needed. You got a horse now.
Yep.
And with that, you had this de-evolution of handmade, handcrafted
and it's
items.
Still true today. As technology has gotten better, your tradesman skills has gone way, way down.
Yeah, you don't need to be able to make certain things now out of wood when you can just buy something out of plastic that does the job.
Carbon fiber.
Yeah, and so the other thing too is we're talking about a primal age, a time when people kill each other, tribes war, and everybody fights here and there. And there's things you can do to protect yourself. As I was diving into ancient civilizations in Americas, and you look at the Southwest, there's a great YouTube channel I've been really binging and enjoying, is the Desert Drifter. And on that channel, you see these cliff dwellings right here in my backyard.
Right.
You're talking Utah, you're talking the Four Corners.
Yep.
And I mean, you're looking at these, they still have arrowheads and corn cobs in them.
Right.
And they're 1,200 years old, some of these. So there's something about that time frame, 12 to 800 years ago, where people lived in cliffs.
Yeah.
Like they had to run to the cliffs, and they have these fortified cliff dwellings. It's like everybody was out to murder each other,
right?
Like the zombie apocalypse.
Exactly.
And it's only in this like 300-year window. It's not before and it's not after. So obviously something was going on that caused human beings to isolate, get away from each other, and get into cliffs. And it's like Mad Max and the Thunderdome stuff.
And even in this, like some of the tactics that they set up in place to protect themselves is pretty crazy too.
The Sheepeaters.
The Sheepeaters, correct.
Yeah. And so what's interesting about that as well is there's multiple ways. If you're in a survival mode, there's multiple ways to protect you.
Right.
One of those is big groups. Lots of horses, lots of dogs, lots of Indians, and big encampments.
Which was not the case here.
So you get that with like the Sioux, the Lakota, the Comanche roaming the plains, and they'd have these big bands. And so you're in safety in numbers.
Yep.
It's a lot of people to attack. You're a lot safer. So you do that. But another way to do it is live in an environment that others are not skilled or capable of living in.
Rough country.
When you're on some hunts where you are able to thrive because your gear is good, you have a teepee with a wood stove, you know how to use it.
Yeah, your physical abilities there.
Your physical abilities, you have the right gear, your boots keep you dry and warm, you have a boot dryer to deal with frozen, wet boots each day. Sweat management, you have good food.
We're spoiled, right?
Like when you have everything dialed in,
right,
you're able to go into places and hunt and thrive, be there for 20 days where other guys are there for 7 or 10 and they've hit their limit.
Yep.
You don't even notice that you are in just harsh, miserable conditions.
Right.
You can take any person with experienced wood craft skills, bushcraft skills, or outdoor skills, and contrast that with some city kid you dump out. It's not comparable.
No.
If you look at, even, let's say, you see this in some of these books I'm reading about the Comanches. The Comanches are out, and the Apache, they're out on the desert. You know, we're talking Oklahoma, Four Corners, parts of Colorado, Texas. And often what they would do is they would steal the horses from the Mexicans or the Europeans, whoever was there in their territory. They wouldn't even bother fighting them. They would just let the desert kill them.
Yep.
So all they had to do was just get the horses gone, and then those men would have to walk their way out, and they'd die. And they themselves could live forever. They're not in any danger at all.
Yeah.
They kind of know where to get water. They know what to eat, how to manage themselves. And that's their home. That's their environment. That's where they thrive. And today I can go outside. I've watched a few hunt films as of late, which we'll talk about on some future podcasts. Been watching a lot of hunt films, and I just look at their techniques and in harsh conditions.
Yeah.
How well are they thriving? What tools, techniques are they using to manage the hunt?
Some better than others.
And I see some poorly done, where I'm like, oh, wow, they really aren't that capable in certain conditions the way that we are.
Yeah.
Not a knock against them. It's just people know what they know. I don't go outside. I remember I heard Joe Rogan the other day talking to someone about being out there, and he's like, dude, I don't know, man, that's intimidating. It is not intimidating. Somebody mentioned, man, that feeling when you get dropped by an airplane and it flies away, and you're like, are they going to come back for me? I'm really alone. Right. And how do you deal with this? And that's intense. And I heard Rogan and somebody kind of talking about this, and I'm like, I stopped feeling that a decade ago.
Right. Exactly.
Especially in the last 5 years. I get dropped off. I'm like, I could walk my way back, even if it was hundreds of miles. I am completely comfortable at being left for weeks, even if a plane never came back.
Especially in a place like, there's other factors, predators, blah, 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 but especially in a place that like water is of the abundance.
Yeah.
It's like super comforting because you're like, well, that's easy to get, because sometimes water can be hard to get, you know, but with the technology we have now and the solar panels and the stereo pens and stuff, like that's not a big issue. The biggest issue is we got fire. It's like
even food, like a fishing pole. There's fish every cast.
Yeah, right.
You know, there's moose meat, there's other things, caribou, there's game out there.
Right.
You do have enough firearm weapon to handle things, defend yourself against a bear.
Exactly.
There's just, you could leave me there for a summer.
We talk about it all the time.
90 days, and I'm going to be just fine, whether you pick me up in a week or not. Some people have this intense fear of, what if they don't show up?
Yeah.
Or they're like, we're going to run out of food on day 9. What if they, I remember when Brady and I were like, I said, we're on top of that mountain. And we're like, there's your moose. We're a day's hike back to base camp. We have no food. We're already without food that day.
Yep.
I'm like, we go for it, bomb off this hill, no food. If we don't kill tonight, we go a full day without food. We don't kill the next day, there's no food. We have a full hike back.
Yep.
No food. I mean, but I've gone 3 days without food on a massively grueling physical hunt.
Right.
And it was fine. I was nowhere near. I could have gone more days.
Yep.
I didn't like it, but I was nowhere near like death of any kind. Right. I had water, and
even some blueberries laying around.
Yeah. We did have a lot of that. And so it's interesting. Like skills matter, technique matters. And so one of the things that I'm back to the sheep eaters, this sheep eater like people, they're living in an area that we've been there. We've been to the
high
top
elevation,
of these
super steep
Yellowstone wilderness areas, these Rocky Mountain regions you got mountain goats outside your tent door.
Yeah.
And you got a foot of snow.
Yep.
And it's negative 10 degrees. It's below zero.
Yep.
And when you're in those conditions and you're so far from civilization, you're so far from a way out.
Yeah.
Days of hiking. When you're in that far and you're in those conditions, you because of that, the odds of you getting attacked by a Sioux raiding party is really low.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Especially if they're not of your own type of people, because they aren't skilled at those environments.
No.
So you can have an entire group of people as hermits up in these places, and the very nature of the landscape that you're in is all that is needed to provide you the safety you're seeking.
Right. Yeah. And like I said, we kind of briefly touched on, like,
just like how the Comanche ditch the cowboys and they die out there.
Right.
The terrain itself and the conditions of itself are what is your protection.
And a lot of these areas in this where the sheep eaters are, there's a reason why they don't use horses, because most horses
useless.
can't make it in there.
No, it's
in that area.
Exactly. The reason they don't adopt the horses is because you can't use a horse.
Right.
There.
And so, like, as far as a safety standpoint as well, I mean, that's obviously what can help or did help the Sheepeater Indians, because they weren't worried about hundreds of guys coming in on horses and taking over where they're at.
So I'm going to read to you some of the firsthand accounts that we have about the Sheepeater Indians that we actually have on a piece of paper.
They're actually recorded.
Yeah, and it's from this book written by W.A. Allen. And the book was published, I want to say, this particular version of the book first came out in 1913, I think. But the recording of the story took place in right at 1900. But the story's interesting. It's not substantiated exactly. This is a story that he wrote about a 115-year-old. That's the idea, is a 115-year-old Shoshone sheep-eater squaw.
Really?
And she was living with the Absaroka, which we know are the Crow from our days of reading Jeremiah Johnson, Liver-Eating Johnson.
Crow killer.
And so she's living with these Crow, this mountain band of Crow, and this guy is like a trapper, and early 1900, and he comes on her. Maybe it was 1890 or something. So he comes across her. I'll dive into it a little bit more, but he comes across her and he hears she's really old. She's been around, and he hears that she's not a Crow. Well, who are you? And she tells this whimsical story of her people that are now basically extinct.
Extinct, basically, yeah.
And, or her little band that's gone. And so with them, their techniques, everything that they were is gone.
Yep.
So things like the horn bow, the tan stuff, the tanned hides, all that, they had some skills, it seems, that were way beyond the rest of the native people, and so they would use their craftsmanship to trade with Indians that had long ago lost the arts.
I was gonna see when the year was of that, but
so going to the book, it says historical references to the sheep-eater peoples is sparse indeed, but what records we do have left by early trappers and traders and official expeditions in the 19th century indicate that encounters between the whites and the so-called sheep-eaters occurred either in the high mountains of Wyoming, principally in Yellowstone Park, or in the mountains of central Idaho. The first such historical record comes from the journals of Captain Bonneville, who in September 1835 sighted 3 Indians in the Wind River Range. This is what he wrote. Captain Bonneville at once concluded that these belonged to a kind of hermit race, scanty in number, that inhabit the highest and most inaccessible fastness. They speak the Shoshone language and probably are offsets from that tribe, though they have peculiarities that are their own, which distinguish them from all other Indians. They are miserably poor, own no horses, and are destitute of every convenience to be derived from an intercourse with the whites. So they're completely Indian.
Yep.
There's no white goods. There's no trading. There's just, they've been utterly independent. Their weapons are bows and stone-pointed arrows with which they hunt the deer, the elk and the mountain sheep. They are to be found scattered about the countries of the Shoshones, Flathead Crow, and Blackfeet tribes, but their residences are always in lonely places and the clefts of rocks. So they're like, you know, a little band. This is how he describes them. Okay. Now, at the same time, there's Osborne Russell, and he makes the following observation while trapping in the Lamar Valley of Yellowstone Park. And this is in July of 1835. Here we found a few Snake Indians, which is another name for Shoshone or Bannock,
right,
comprising 6 men, 7 women, and 8 or 10 children who were the only inhabitants of this lonely and secluded spot. They were all neatly clothed in dressed deer and sheepskins of the highest quality and seemed to be perfectly contented and happy. They were rather surprised at our approach and retreated to the heights where they might have a view of us without apprehending any danger. But having persuaded them of our pacific intentions, pacifist, we then succeeded in getting them to encamp with us. Their personal property consisted of 1 old butcher knife, nearly worn to the back, so they had a metal knife, 2 old shattered fuses or rifles, and that had long become useless for want of ammunition, a small stone pot, and about 30 dogs on which they carried their skins, clothing, provisions, etc. They were well armed with bows and arrows pointed with obsidian.
2 totally different
descriptions
of what they think are the same people.
Exactly. Now, he said it was 3 Indians in the Wind River, and this other group is like 10 men, 7 men, and 10 kids.
20 to 23, 25, something like that. Total?
6 men, 7 women, 10 children.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
About 20s.
But of the highest quality, clean looking, stone arrow-tipped weapons, like very with it, contented, comfortable, on the ball, like, and hung out with them a little bit. So that's 1835. 1825, there was another account which was similar to that second one. So it's like the first one, I feel like this Captain Bonneville may have had just a disliking of anyone that wasn't white,
right,
in a way.
Exactly.
Because he calls them a hermit race. When he says they have scanty in number, they're in the highest, most inaccessible areas, like the top of the Rocky Mountains. They speak a Shoshone language, but they don't look Shoshone to us, and they don't seem to act like Shoshone.
Yep.
They're like their own thing, and they're miserably poor. They don't have, and his definition of poor is they don't have horses and they don't have anything from white people.
Yep.
That's his definition of poor. And that their weapons aren't rifles and other, they're just stone pointed arrows, and that they eat the sheep. And they live in lonely places in the middle of nowhere. So there's your sort of explanation, but you have one that sort of is like, wow, these people are impressive.
Yeah.
And wow, these people are backwards. It's like your two
Complete opposite.
It says, carrying on with the book, it says C.W. Cook, in his account of the Folsom Cook expedition of 1869, the Valley of the Upper Yellowstone, says, on the 8th day out, we encountered a band of Indians, who, however, they proved to be Tonkies or sheep eaters and friendly. The discovery of their character relieved our minds of apprehension, and we conversed with them as well as their limited knowledge of English and through pantomime. So this would be roughly 40 years later from the other account, 45 years later, 40, 45, it says in the book. And kind of what goes on here, and it's really fascinating, more accounts come mostly in the 1870s and through the 1880s.
Right.
And what you see is kind of disturbing, because what they saw in 1825, 1830, 1835 was like this together with it people.
Yep.
By 1870, what you saw were dying or gone. The sheep eaters were done.
Mm-hmm.
It was like such a quick, they disappeared.
Yeah.
More or less. There were a few here and there, but some of these that they reference early, and I think the book kind of just says it's a misnomer to actually say there's actually a legit like sheep eater tribe or something.
Yeah.
It's more like some offshoots of people that spoke Shoshone and sort of retained Stone Age skill sets.
Yep.
Lived remote and apart from everyone else and thrived and would trade here and there. But it was almost like 20 people.
Yeah.
Not a tribe.
No, there wasn't hundreds of them.
They didn't gather
around
together in
right.
these massive.
I mean, like I'm sure, especially in that terrain, like birth rates can't be that high.
Well, they kind of knew each other, though. It sounds like
Yep.
this band of 7 to 10 would go hook up with this band.
Yeah.
You know, they had families and groups in different pockets, but this wasn't this was sort of a hermit group of people.
Yeah, it wasn't like a colonial group.
No,
of people
and they
by
didn't
any means.
quite just have this deep cultural connection, I think, to these other Shoshone down off the mountain in the valleys and in other
Right.
places. They still knew of each other, spoke the same language, and were able to trade. But yeah, we tend to think of we tend to not think of independent, just people that have lived alone as
Right.
as just their own thing. They got to be part of this other nation or this group.
Somewhere.
But it does sound like they're fairly independent. And then you get into the 1870s, and there's some disparaging references of them. There was traces of these Indians left by the 1870s, possibly. It says, we had seen where some shelters of logs had rotten and tumbled down from age, with a few poles standing in the former summer camps. There was no fresh trails whatever. Appearances indicated that the basin of the Yellowstone Plateau had been almost entirely abandoned. A few lodges of sheep eaters and a branch remnant of the snake tribe, wretched beasts who run from the sight of a white man or from any other tribe of Indians, once said to inhabit the fastness of the mountains around the lakes, poorly armed and dismounted, no horses, obtaining a precarious subsistence and in defenseless condition. We saw, however, no recent traces of them. So there's another reference that they had of that group, but they were gone. So one thing that's when you go back earlier to like the Fremont people, or like you go back in human history, 80, just a couple hundred years later, a couple thousand years ago almost, you're dealing with these people that were in America, descendants of the Hopi people, I think it was, or Adobe, or something like that. But you see in this, they didn't adopt the horse,
right?
And on Desert Drifter, there's some cool aerials where you're on Google Earth and you can see these rock traps,
right,
for sheep.
Yep, they'd build them of rocks, and then like they would have
in the Frank. It looks like they build them out of sticks,
wood, like logs and timber that they'd fallen and carried and stacked up somehow and laid across. And I mean, it's like for a couple hundred yards, of just built. Like,
so they built these corrals,
basically,
and then they would herd the sheep or chase the sheep into these pens, and then usually it would be a chase uphill.
So that's what I understood, was a chase uphill,
like a hook, shaped like a hook.
Basically, your corral would go up the mountain like this, and kind of the top part of it would curve, and then as it came down, you would have this entrapment built where they would it'd funnel them, and they'd fall into a really small corral. As they come up, they drop down in, and they can't get out.
Yep.
And so they're causing them to run uphill and then turning them back down.
And then they shoot them inside the corral. Yep. So these sheep traps, and some of them are even considered to do elk, and some of them are in the mountains of Wyoming and other places. These were pre-horse strategies, it seems, for killing large amounts of big game animals and herds, where you could chase an entire herd into this trap or this pen or this cliff trap, where you could chase them off a cliff, and then there you go, like a buffalo cliff or something. And so there's these places, and it looks like all over near the Middle Fork, there's a number of areas on the Salmon River, where there's these Sheepeater traps, and they would this is how they would do it. So think about it. They didn't need horses for that.
Right.
They had a good thing going. They were safe because no one would go there. They love where they grew up and how they live. They're actually comfortable in conditions that others aren't.
Right.
And you can see how they would have sort of evolved or continued on without the influence of modern technology and more modern ways, and actually find no need for them because they have such a skilled setup already. They have their traps, they have their horn bows.
I mean, if you're watching this, look at the boots they made. Like, come on. Like, you want a pair of those? I do.
You saw those boots. They say those boots are
so it's buffalo. They say buffalo
moccasin,
sole moccasin, and then they coyote topped with a sheep fur.
And the inside, the sheep is
all lined.
Hey everybody, if you like the show and you want to support us, head on over to Mountain Ops. If you're in need of a new merino hoodie, or you want some workout clothes, or you just want a little pick-me-up. I like the Mountain Ops Ignite, especially like the pink lemonade flavor. It's a good one. I recommend that. Head on over to Mountain Ops, use the code GRIDDY. You're going to save, and it's going to help us keep bringing you the show. Thanks for tuning in. Now, let's get back to the show.
With the hair.
The hair facing to your body.
For warmth.
And they said those little fur boots are warm out to 40 below.
They said at least minus 40. I'm like,
and then if you look at that YouTube video where they show other artisan artifacts from like Sheepeater Indians, from the hides that they tanned to the bows that they made, they would take the horn off of a bighorn sheep. It has to be the same ram.
Right.
Take one side, then the other. The longer, the better.
Yep.
They would then
shave them down,
cut off.
Yep.
The outer curl of the horn. Just cut it off, and then they would lay it flat by heating it up in like a hot spring, a geyser or something, and leave it in the hot spring for a while, a month, whatever, weeks. Once it got hot enough, they could then lay the horn out flat and fasten it to like a flat board, and then let it dry. Then what you have is the reason the bow is so powerful in the way that it works is you're reversing the curl. So it wants to curl back because of the way the horn grows. It wants to curl the opposite direction. And so when you flatten it out and then you take the top and bottom, each horn makes up the top and bottom of the riser, of the limb, I should say. And then you got your handle in the middle. Now you have this really strong tapering horn. But it's like God made them the perfect package to make an incredibly durable, powerful 70-pound bow.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know, it's just like the whole mountain man / Indian side of things, like when you're tying stuff together with sinew and that. I mean, that is skill, like 100% a skill set that has been completely lost.
Chipping a razor sharp broadhead out of a rock.
Right.
And then fastening it to an arrow and launching it, and it flies straight. Like, we're bitching if our arrows have a little bit of bend in it, or if their tolerance isn't clean, or their dynamic spine is off.
Right.
I mean, can you imagine? Like, and these guys, I was reading, because I really legit wanted to know how accurate was like a Comanche bow. How far can it shoot? You know,
right?
That kind of thing. From what I could read, this is what I gathered. Every one of these people generally were quite skilled at hitting something out to 50 yards.
Impressive.
50 yards with and you think about it, we've seen some people that spend a lot of their life, they didn't grow up shooting grasshoppers in a field like a Lakota warrior would as a little boy, but they learned to, some of the best, like trad bow guys we know, 50 yards. If they know the yardage, they have a couple techniques, they're proficient.
Yep.
Imagine if you grew up with that since you were a little boy and it was integrated into your life and you had to hunt. Not surprised that they're good at out to 50 yards. These are still 70-pound bows. The arrows are similar weight. They're just built a little different.
Right.
It's a phenomenal. It's amazing. It's amazing.
It is. It truly is. Especially how time consuming something like that is. You know, waiting for the horn and each.
I think they said 3 months it takes to make a horn bow back.
Right.
Like that's about how much time it would take one of those people to make it. Now I'm sure there's like curing periods and waiting periods and all this stuff. And when you has to soak for so long, but the thing is the other tribes and other people made horn bows, in America, but it sounds like the Sheepeater made an exceptional
had
one.
it dialed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Same with like their hides. And that's what they talk about is the trappers and stuff and the traders, they would love to get their hands on those hides because they're just something about how they're tanned. They're just so much better done than any other hides they came across.
Another thing it was interesting was they use a certain feather. I forget what it was because it wouldn't soak up the blood. And other feathers would. So there's like 2 feathers they tended to use. So once it passed through an animal's body, the other feathers were no good.
Right.
It would ruin the feathers or you couldn't just pick it up and shoot it again. Little things like we wouldn't even think of now.
Yeah.
And another thing was the Comanche, they were saying, you know, they were better at a short range, super accurate. They really shot best on the move, not stationary.
Right.
Where other Indians fought stationary. And so they were better at shooting from like a standing position.
Yeah.
Where a Comanche needs to be like almost running sideways and can hit. But if they stand still, it's less. But the thing they said, there was plenty of accounts where Comanches shot people at 100 yards with their bows.
Right.
And, 70 to 100 yards was not, and so one of the things that I was like, well, you're shooting an arrow. And they said, no, you don't get it. This one account. This guy was like, what you don't understand is they have shot 5 arrows into the air at 70 yards before the first one lands.
Jeez.
So when you're aiming, when a soldier is sitting there and they're aiming an arrow, like, okay, one arrow is coming in and misses you.
Yeah.
So you move to the left or the right. Well, there's actually other ones following, and you
coming
move right into getting shot.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, if you and I take a shot, ting, 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 right? We group in a vicinity.
Mm-hmm.
If you could launch 5 arrows at relative levels of accuracy, and let's say one is off 6 inches, one's 6, one's 12, one up, low, high, left, right. There's a pretty good chance you're going to put one in what you're aiming at if you get 5 shots.
Exactly. I mean, you look at like some of the trick shooters and stuff, even like Byron Ferguson and that. I mean, they can launch some arrows pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
And Byron he kind of showed proof of being able to shoot accuracy.
Did Larson.
Yeah.
Lars is it Lars?
I think it's Lars. But my one, and you guys have probably seen it too, but like Byron Ferguson, they throw up the aspirin and it's like, he smokes that, or through mirrors. And then I look at like Joel Turner shooting a trad bow.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, pretty incredible shot.
Yeah.
Like really is. And at distance too.
Well, the thing that's unnerving about some of that is it's like artillery.
Yeah.
Where you watch them go shoot that first arrow and they go, oh, I was 10 yards short. Oh, now it's in trouble.
Yeah.
And the second arrow is dead on.
I know. And it's funny, like even with shooting with Joel, like he will too.
They're like, oh, now I know what I need to do.
Got a rangefinder.
Slight adjustment, and now you're in trouble.
Exactly.
And I think that's exactly how a native person, they shoot one arrow and they're like, oh, now I know instinctively what to do with the second one. Now you're in trouble.
Yeah. Pretty fascinating.
Yes. So this whole Sheepeater thing, I've looked at the horn bows now. They're fascinating. And there's a couple of guys, modern day cowboys, Wyoming dudes that were like, I want to figure out how it's done. And they've actually made like 40 or 50 of them and sold them.
That's cool.
And they basically, they don't look as good. I'll tell you that. They look a lot less artistic looking and beautiful, but they got it done. So this is in 1879. Now we're getting toward the end of the 18th century instead of at the beginning.
Right.
And when we're, or 19th, when we get there, we get a report of sheep eaters remaining after 1879 is supplied by General Sheridan in his report. And he says that the expedition had 5 sheep-eating Indians as guides. This is in 1882. Scattered individuals claiming to be sheep eaters remained after 1880. Among these was Togwoti, who became an important chief and guide among the Wind River Shoshones. Holtzkrantz deduces that in the late history of the sheep eaters, marauding plains tribes plus smallpox introduced by the whites diminished the number of those who were still free roaming. Grace Hebbard makes reference to the Sioux as bringing about the eventual extinction of the sheep eaters. Ultimately, the Sioux penetrated to their recesses. She gives these as the Absaroka, Ten Sleep, and Teton Mountains, and virtually exterminated them. The most interesting story from a romantic point of view, but least substantiated from a scientific point of view, is this book right here. And it's W.A. Allen's account of the story he obtained from the alleged 115-year-old sheep-eater squaw. Under the Ground. That's her name, Under the Ground. She was with a band of mountain crows near the Bighorn Mountains. When Allen says he met her in 1913, that's when he met her. And according to Allen, so she would have been born, according to this, in 1798.
Jeez.
According to Allen, she described the smallpox epidemic and its consequences among her people. By and by, sheep eater not many. They go to the other Indian tribes down in valley on river where much big water runs and eat heap buffalo. Ride pony, marry squaw. Then sheep eater no more. No more papoose, no more squaw, all gone. Left with these scant but often alluring historical accounts of the elusive sheep eaters, we must turn to ethnographic accounts and our own field work in order to better identify them. So she's very old. That's not disputed.
Right.
She's ancient, and she tells her story. Maybe she was 90 years old. Maybe she was 115 years old. Either way, she's old, which means she would have been around at the very least in those 1920s, 30s time frame where those first accounts of the sheep eater were.
Yeah, in the 1820s.
Or 1820s, yeah. Yep. 1820s, 1830s. So she was likely there. And she relates a story that this gentleman writes down. Now, the story is pretty interesting. It's very short, but it's a tale that he weaves and it's really cool. I'll dive into it on a future episode. But she tells this account more or less where how they live, what their houses are made out of, how they thrive up there. You know, they use like this pine gum and pitch to make houses. They don't use teepees. You know, you think about it. If you're living at 40 below, up under 3 feet of snow, 4 feet of snow or more,
right,
you're building a different kind of lodge. They're thriving, though. They're warm. You know, they've done their prep preseason. I'm sure they can kill sheep fairly easily, too, in some of those situations when the winter
and with
gets
everything
nasty.
else, you know, elk, deer, bear.
Yeah, the elk come in, they said, every winter, and that's when they would, or when they come post-winter, spring, they would get a lot. Because they come up into those mountains to put on weight, and when the spring growth
forage
comes,
and all that.
And so they're not in the valleys. But in the end, and I'm gonna read about it later because if this is true, wow, it's cool. It's very cool. Her whole story is it's short. You know, it's got big type. I think it's 70 pages roughly, but they have sort of a different way of living. And she describes it. It's very special, it sounds like. You'd have to have a unique culture and way of being, but it sounds very, they almost wonder if these people were not actually Shoshone, but know the Shoshone language, but come from, they said, further north, you know,
some descendants from
like Inuit, that kind of thing.
Yep.
And so there's and that maybe they were there long before the other Shoshone were there, and you don't know.
Yeah.
But when you go into the evidence that they have, that's not these accounts, there's no question that there were people that lived there. They left petroglyphs. They hunted sheep. They lived on those sheep. They didn't adopt the horse. They had stone-tipped weapons, and they had horn bows. Like, those are all like, yep, check. Yeah. That was a thing.
Well, one of the things we didn't really touch on was some of their safety, like where they lived. Defenses.
That's a thing that is covered by the 115-year-old squaw.
Yep.
Now, this is her. And she's supposedly 115 years old. This is the woman that he says he spoke to. And it's funny because, you know, they say your telemeters in your body are, we're supposed to live to be 120 on your genes, on your DNA.
Yep.
Most animals live out to the extent of their telemeters on their genes. So human beings, in theory, ought to live to be 120. That's kind of our natural state. We don't achieve it. And there's lots of theories.
Mountain Dew takes care of that pretty quick.
Yeah. But if you were living this lifestyle and you were eating that way, in theory, that's a possibility in terms of if you don't get killed by if you are able to get to old age and die of old age causes, it's not uncommon to make it that far. It's uncommon in the sense that you didn't get crushed by a rock or fall off a cliff or have an accident or
shot by
accident or just things that befall human beings. But in absence of that, if those things never happened, then you're not going to die from heart disease. You're not going to die from dementia. You're not going to die from Alzheimer's. You're not going to die from whatever, appendix bursting, these weird things that we kind of have today. They're not having those because of diet and way of living. But either way, the story is really interesting, and she does talk about a couple of things, and one of them is the Sioux warriors and their tribe and how she described them and how they did penetrate into those mountains and those reaches when they were pushed out by Europeans and westward expansion. They did the same thing. They had to push up into those mountains to get away from soldiers and Europeans that they were in battle with, and they displaced those Sheepeater Shoshone, it sounds like. Now, according to this squaw woman under the ground, that's 115 years old, she tells a story of their people, the Sheepeater people, repelling the Sioux Indians when they came after them. It's a neat story. And according to her, they set up the Sioux to come through
like a slot canyon,
like a really tight trail, cliffed out trail.
Which in that terrain is very possible.
1,000%. You and I have hiked on some of that and we're like, dude, if this is so sketchy.
I know, there's
so easy to kill you.
That have
right
trails, and I've seen firsthand from experience.
Yes.
A dead horse laying in the middle of it because the horse fell off right there.
Yep.
And there's no other way around it.
And above you, there are some loose boulders and rocks and real sketchy stuff where it's like, dude, if that slipped, you'd be dead.
Right. Or big rock slides.
Yeah. So
come about.
She tells of where they had fortified or built these defenses to basically wipe out an army if they came through this certain slot to get after people. And she tells of them having built these mechanisms to, I mean, what comes to my mind is when the pirates in Swiss Family Robinson are, coming up and they're like, let all the logs fall, and they fall down the mountain and crush them, or rock slides.
Pull a lever or whatever.
Pull a lever, and it's like now they're all crushed. But that's in essence what she describes, and it's a pretty fanciful tale, and it makes you wonder.
Well, it makes sense in some of that country.
There's a lot of places where you just be hunting and go, you know what? If you just moved that,
right,
this whole thing would fall.
Right.
And it would kill any, like you could start an avalanche or a rock slide or anything if you did this or that. So,
it makes me want to go like find the petroglyphs and then find like, okay, nearby, where's this, like, where can be a slot canyon and go find some bones or something down in there. But
so she tells that tale, but the one tale she goes into is, and this is probably absolutely real as well, that a sick, smallpox infested white man was brought into their village. He wasn't well. He had been traveling. He was like a trapper. He turned red. They tried this. Their medicine men tried to help him. And then, of course, what he did was
get them all sick.
And one by one, there's a horror story of all the Indians in the mountains. And then they would run from their band to the next band over to help, to seek help or to get away from what happened. And it incubates and then it attacks. And so then basically they died of disease.
Yeah.
And that was already the story of
just coming across the West. The civilization came across. Yeah.
I mean, more Indians were wiped out by white man's diseases than they did by war.
Yep.
In fact, they speculate that some 90% of this continent was killed by diseases 100 years before
even the white men settlers,
even perhaps even before Columbus.
Right. Yep.
So what we see is sort of 100 years after, and another 100 years later after that, of civilization here completely wiped out.
Yeah.
And what you see is just sort of the remnants of it, and the people that survived lost all their knowledge, technology. They become more primitive and because we do have ancient civilizations, remnants of it, but the people here don't, especially when you go to South America. It's there, but it's like it just disappeared 100 years or 200 years before we got here.
Right.
How did it disappear? I mean, how come it wasn't more prevalent? And we didn't know that because it was so overgrown. It just disappeared in the jungle.
Yeah.
But it's different in the desert. There's some places where the corn's still sitting there.
Yeah.
And it's been 500-year-old corn
or
cob.
more.
And you're like, nothing changes in some of these pockets.
Right.
It's just preserved, where other places, the earth destroys it, the rain, the water, the acid, the growth, and it's gone, and you wouldn't know it was there. And you use LiDAR and things like that, and you're exposing some, like, whoa.
Yeah. Oh, LiDAR technology is something that's been
caused a paradigm shift.
Yeah, because there's a lot of stuff, whether it may be boats that you're finding or different rock artifacts, whatever it may be. LiDAR technology is pretty incredible.
Yeah. And basically, for those that don't know, LiDAR is like an echo technology, I think.
Yeah. And you're basically like it'll show you the structures and steepness of your rocks and all that stuff.
Think of it as like X-ray vision. And
for terrain.
And when you run the LiDAR over like South America, now we can see vast roads that are not there anymore. Buildings, they're discovering lots of ancient places,
ships
that you could not otherwise locate. And they're like, oh, there's the thing. And now you're seeing, when you do that, it's kind of eerie, because now you have cities that had millions of people in them.
Yeah.
And metropolises sort of like Egypt or something in South America. And we used to think there was just like one or two little, no, it's like those, like Machu Picchu and stuff, and Ichinitzi or those, some of those places, they all have, they're all part of a broader collection of those
Yeah,
that
right.
we're discovering. So I was down in Mexico and we went and toured one, and I'm like, it was found 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
A vast, big old like city structure with ornate design. You're like, how did they build this?
Yeah.
This is not like a teepee, you know?
I mean, the Egyptian pyramids.
Mhm.
It's like how in the hell?
That's aliens.
yeah,
No.
like I can't even think.
Anyway, it's just a fun conversation. Been studying a little bit more about them. I think it'll be worth a little bit of a read
Mhm.
to go over this and from her firsthand account. If the dude made it up, he's an
He's
a-hole.
creative.
W.A. Allen. I just think he probably didn't.
Yeah,
I think it's an oral story that he captured, and I bet you there's more truth than not. He doesn't seem to be, like they said, it's not substantiated, but we're reading this other book, The Journey of Crazy Horse. There's really not a lot of Indian history that wasn't oral for 100 years before it got written down.
yeah, right.
Whereas Daniel Boone in his era, they're like writing it all
They wrote the
down,
whole thing
sending
down.
letters, saying this has just happened. You know, it's like you or I just
Yep.
writing journals and doing movies. There's a record. But if you're people that didn't have that kind of stuff,
Word of mouth.
it's word of mouth. That's all you got left at the end of the day.
Yep.
And it gets recorded years later. And so it's not exact. But when you're only 100 years removed from when it happened, or 50 to 70 years removed, it's not at all outside the realm of reality.
Right.
It's absolutely possible. So anyway, cool.
Especially with like factual stuff, with the petroglyphs and things like that are there. Like that definitely helps
Mhm.
tell that story at the time.
One of the things that I didn't mention was the Sheepeater. Their name is Tukudeka. And Deka, I believe, is eat in Shoshone. And so it's Sheepeater. Tuku, I imagine, is
Must be
sheep.
the sheep.
Deka. And they actually name their groups of people within their communities or reference them like, we might say you're an Oregonian or
Yeah.
Utahn or Idahoan or whatever. They would say that's a sheep eater, that's a buffalo eater,
That's a mountain dweller.
that's a mountain dweller, that's a salmon eater.
Mhm.
And they would, in Shoshone custom, they would reference a people by what they ate. So the sheep eaters were referenced to by what they ate.
Yep.
And hence the name. And they mostly did rely on sheep. So the book goes on to say, it's not, like I said, the identification, basically what they say is they're Shoshone speaking people. That's part of it. They ate sheep. They were mountain dwelling people. But to say that they were all of one group or in like from Yellowstone
Yeah.
to here or a vast tribe network or
right.
sounds like it's more like ancient people in this pocket.
Mhm.
Here, hermit-like, away from everyone else, with a common language.
I can get behind that.
Yeah, anyway, super interesting. So, if you got any questions or anything that,
Or if you know somebody
Yeah,
that
you
has
knows.
some.
I'm going to talk to in my ward here at church. There's a gentleman that is a Shoshone.
Mm-hmm.
From the Shoshone tribe. And it turns out right here in my backyard, this is all Shoshone land, and some treaties were made up in here, and up there just across from my house is some sacred Shoshone grounds.
Really?
And so there's a history here of the Shoshone culture. So my daughter has had conversations with him a few times about it, and really cool. I kind of want to learn a little more about it, but crazy. It's a lot of respect for the woodcraft and the bushcraft and how they learned to do what they did here. And it's pretty cool. So if you got anything to add, or somebody or something that I missed, because it's kind of fanciful in the way you can't hardly find any information about it at all.
Right.
So let us know in the
They're
comment
incredible
section.
people.
I've had fun. And look forward to that sheep hunt film. You're going to like it. It's going to be cool. We're going to show it at the Hunt Expo.
Yep.
So
And then release it digitally
right after that.
right after that.
But we're going to sell some tickets. Big old theater or two. So look for that. We're going to announce that very soon. Thanks for tuning in, guys. And stay gritty.